Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, everyone. This is your host, Keith Broders, for the Friends of Liberty Blog Talk Radio show. Tonight we have a co-host, and I'm going to introduce him first, and then I'm going to ask him to go ahead and introduce our primary guest for this evening. The individual that will be working with us this evening is a gentleman who is an extreme patriot and passionate defender of liberty. He is a constitutional scholar, and he is just about as tenacious as any bulldog that I've ever come in contact with. His name is Arnie Rosner. He is a resident of Southern California, and he will be our guest host this evening. He will primarily be the one that will be interacting with our guest. And at this time, then, I'd like to turn the microphone over to my friend, Arnie Rosner.
Hello, Keith, and everybody. Permit me to clarify one thing. I'm not a scholar. I'm just an ordinary person that got involved in this when the abomination started. And it got me curious that there was something going on when the rights of Rush Limbaugh were attacked, his free speech rights. So that's how I got involved, and that's when it all began for me. Prior to that, I was just a person who thought my civic obligation was to vote, and that's what I did religiously. But it's been a long journey, been at it for 4 years now, and have come to understand a great deal. Part of the journey has brought me to meet a dynamic individual who has more than aptly demonstrated his patriotism, and that's Mr. Hartford Van Dyke. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Van Dyke.
Hello. How are you doing tonight?
Well, we're doing fine. We should say a little something about one of Hartford's accomplishments. He's written several books, and one of them right now you can go to read a good part of it on the scanretina.com, and it has to do with the New World Order and the designs behind it. And evidently it was such a threat to the system that it cost Hartford 7 years and 4 months of his life, because they put him in federal prison to attempt to restrict him from publishing his book. So with that, may I ask Hartford to tell us a little something about it?
What happened in that particular case, over the years I developed a method of criminal process for taking public officials to task for violating their oaths, violating their job description. It's possible with, there's 10 statutes that govern it, and I don't use any case law in my work. It's all done by principles. It's commercial primarily. And what it does is it takes the acts of the public official, compares them with Title 18 and Title 42 of the United States Code, brings a dollar value to the matter. If the process is treated with contempt, it goes into default and becomes an accounts receivable. And that's the basic process. And I have filed criminal charges against a public official by the name of John Kugenauer, federal judge. And I'm hearing some other talk in the background.
Yeah, Keith, do you have something going on in the background there?
No.
I hear extra voices in this thing. Okay, anyway, there it comes back again. Must be getting the loop or something. Anyway, I filed in criminal charges against a judge in Seattle, Washington by the name of John C. Kugenauer and 5 U.S. attorneys. And the process was because they had falsely, the arrest process they did was wrong, but more than that, when they got into court, they were not given an opportunity to defend themselves according.
Hang on a second. Are we still there, Keith?
Yep.
Yeah.
Keith?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. And these people violated their oath of office. They put these people in. There were 7 people they put into prison. And did it without the due process of law, denied them their opportunity to present their issues. And one of them was a friend of mine, and so I just stepped in and did a proxy process for him. And as time went on, it expanded its boundaries considerably. And they denied them, put in the proper paperwork that they needed, held them, and every 3 days when they do that, it's an improper and unlawful incarceration, and every 3 days the charges repeat. And it was running at something like $3.27 million every 3 days. And the way that's the values are put in there is through the United States Code. They had agreed to do the job, and then, for example, the judge had agreed to do a job of a judge. If he's not doing the job the way it's supposed to be, following the Code of Judicial Conduct and other such things in the Constitution, he violates the law. It is possible under the commercial system to charge the judge with a crime. The criminal process in the United States system is actually the commercial process of the United States government, and it's subject to all the laws of commerce internationally. And when these people don't comply, then the tax money that's been spent to hire them in as judges or whatever is being misplaced. These people are not doing the job they're supposed to, so they shouldn't be absorbing tax money. So anyway, I developed a method of charging them. It's a very simple form, actually, and it's available if people want to get a copy of it. It's a box form, and it's like a traffic citation. And, the cop will mark the boxes with the conditions of the weather and all the various things that happen in the site and hand you the traffic citation. Well, in this particular case, the citation is several pages long. It's got a lot of choices to make. You can read the form, and it's kind of do-it-yourself check form. It doesn't require a great deal of initial skill to do it. It's all referred back to the Constitution at $10,000 a box under Title 18, Section 241. And this sets up a dollar value, and if the judge or the attorneys or whoever treat it with contempt and don't answer it, it's an affidavit process, and if they fail to answer it or refuse to answer it, it goes into default, which means it's an automatic win. And it creates an accounts receivable, which that can then be brokered. And if they can't pay the bill, then it comes out of the government's coffers and acts as a tax rebate to the public. And then that money can be dispersed to public needs, so that the tax money, even though it doesn't go to the judge, then it goes back into the system for the people to spend on other civic and public needs. And it's a method. It's what's called a public wealth rebate tax rebate system. Now, the book that you have that he's mentioning, the book they didn't want published, has the title "How to Create Currencies for Local Communities." Well, what happened was after I got the system going, I didn't get the response I was supposed to. It went into default. I created a trust, a very, very simple trust, making it clear that all this money had to go back to the public. And then I proceeded to disperse the money. And they could not find any fault with the disbursement process. The Secret Service was involved in that, and the FBI, and none of them could find a problem with the process, and they had to let it go on for about 5 years. And with their full knowledge, and I made them copies of the disbursements that were made, so they knew what was going on. Whatever they needed, they could ask for if it was beyond that. And so it was a valid debt collection option currency. And I distributed money to 39 counties of the state of Washington in the amount of $2.2 billion. But by the time this thing had run in the jails, it was quite a bit of money. It was 4.5 years, I think, was the one that was held the longest. And with 1% per month compounded monthly at interest rate, the interest rate was 12.5% per year. On those large figures, the fund grew very rapidly. And so I created this fund, this Public Wealth Rebate Bank fund, and it was available for people to make requests of what they wanted. And it really didn't get as much publicity as I would have liked to, because I didn't have the means. I had to do this whole process out of my own pocket. I couldn't make any money off of it. I pioneered it, and I pioneered the whole process, paid for it all out of my own pocket, and got it working as far as I could. From that on, when the person got one of these notes, it was up to him to take it out, to have it brokered or put up for auction, sold on the international money market or whatever he wanted to do. And so it was a method of bringing the governments around to the realization that if the officers of the government didn't do their jobs right, then some of that tax money was going to come right back and go to the public, and it would be not money available to the government anymore. And it created a currency that was very usable, and but people were not ready to deal with that currency because they didn't understand the fine points of commerce, and getting a note brokered for $60 million is not a common thing. But I put 5 of those out to hospitals. And so anyway, there's a lot of it put out. But the bottom line was that if people don't, you can offer these things to them, but if they don't know what to do with them or how to broker them or go looking for them, if they're not persistent, in other words, they don't get results. And so I laid the foundation down for being able to do this. And that book, when I created the trust, I had to describe this banking process. So I created a bank manual. So when I would give out one of these notes, say for $60 million to Dornbecker's Children's Hospital or Emmanuel Legacy Hospital or Seattle Children's Hospital, Seattle Burn Center, Seattle General Hospital, all 5 of those, each time I would put out one of these disbursement notes to them, I would also provide them with about a 200-page book that told them how to use it. Because, the note is it tells you what the documentation is, where they can look for it and all that, but then they have to go chase all that down. It takes time. So what you do is you produce a manual that gives them all the basic documentary information they need to be able to approach a broker. And so that's what I applied at that point. And I created a bank manual, and that bank manual eventually evolved into this book, How to Create Currencies for Local Communities. And the basic concept is the same as a traffic cop. Let's say a legislature passes a law that it's against the law to go through a red light and sets a fine of $100 on it. That is passed down to the counties. They adopt it, incorporate it into their legal system. They hire a cop to go out on the street, stop the traffic, stop people that are running red lights, give them a ticket. If the person doesn't show up for court, it's an automatic win for the county. The person is supposed to be able to show, but if he doesn't, then they have an option there, because he didn't show, to put a lien on his house until he pays that amount of money. The house is sold. The first people to get the money from it is going to be the county to cover that traffic ticket. Well, you do the very same thing with regard to public officials. You file criminal charges against them if they deserve them, and you don't charge anybody that doesn't deserve it. You have to be real fine and real strict about this. The law is a stick that beats from both ends, and you got to have a good hold on your end of the stick. So in this situation, if you get it to the point where you have these charges filed and they're treated with contempt, it becomes an accounts receivable. Well, what you're doing is you're running a banking system with debt collection options. There's no cash flow in the trust, but the item that's put out to the beneficiary, whoever it is, has the option to go and broker this note. And because they can broker this note either locally by collecting it from the U.S. Treasury, actually from the Federal Reserve Bank, because that's all the banking goes through the Federal Reserve Bank. If you can't collect it from them, then you can put it on auction to like eBay or something that has an international connection, and put a note up for Dutch auction. And the Dutch auction is a type of auction where it starts at the top and moves downward. It's not like a regular auction where you have something to sell like an automobile. You auction it uphill. The one that bids the highest gets the automobile. Well, when it's on the other side, which is a debt collection instrument, you put out an offer to bid on this note. Let's say it's $1 million note, and you put out the option to bid on it. You wait about 30 days, whatever the time period is they allot for closed bids. And the person that thinks, well, maybe one person thinks he can collect that note for it's going to cost him $5 million to collect that $1 million note. And another one finds he thinks he can do it for $4 million, and another for $3 million. Well, the one that comes up with the lowest bid is the one that gets the note. That's the way it works. It's a downward bid. It's the same bidding system. The Dutch auction is the same bidding system used to buy United States bonds off the market. So anyway, let's say they bid down to $3 million, and that's the lowest bid. Then a commercial notary public changes the face value of that note from $1 million to $3 million if it bid at $3 million. And the person that gets the note has got to pay you $1 million for the face value of the note, and he's left with, and he has to pay off the cost of the auction, and then whatever he has left, he has either to pay for debt collection processes or a profit. So if some little country picks up this note at $3 million, they can take that note and use it in the international money market to pay off a trade deficit owed to the United States government. And in that way, the United States government is forced to pay that note.
Hartford, I do have a caller here. Do you want to?
Sure, let's go for it.
Okay, I have a caller from area code 661. Would you please identify yourself and tell us where you're calling from?
Hello?
Yes,
Hello.
Area code 661.
Oh, okay. Okay, I didn't realize that's where it went through. Yeah, my name is Boris, and I just want to talk to Hartford. Man, I don't know. Are you the one who wrote Silent Weapons for Client Wars?
Yes,
That has to be one of the best training manuals I've ever seen. Because we have utilized it and we looked at it. It's very weird, but we've used it as motivation to do certain things. And what we've come up with is very interesting. Mm-hmm. That it appears that with all this birth certificates and shit like that, none of those identify you. It identifies an infant and a state they're holding conservatorship. And what it is a reversionary interest when you go out to use it because you're actually the purchaser of it, the protected purchaser. Mm-hmm. So there's a possibility it could revert back to the infant, but since you're the purchaser of it, it reverts back to you. So what we're actually looking at is assigning that interest back to or for the account of the United States under 12 U.S.C. 95A for immediate quittance and discharge of future obligations of anyone in that name. Mm-hmm. or using that name, and also using it as the insurance policy for nobody can be held harm by relying on that statute. So it basically creates a double indemnification policy for everyone, and all we do is assign an interest that happens when you die.
Mm-hmm. Well, I tell you, you've already gone over the top of my head in some of that because I've stayed very, very simple in what I do. Yeah. But the thing is, I think you should put that together, and there should be some type of paperwork on it, and you should make it available to the public.
We are. I do it all the time. As soon as I got your manual, that little silent lesson, I must have read it about 300 times. I realized something. All we have to do is change the input to get the desired output because the mechanism has already been built.
That's right.
Where are you calling from again?
I'm from Florida, actually. I don't know where this number is. I'm actually calling off Skype, so I don't know where the number's coming through. But so we've been putting it together, and we've had other people go on, and they're starting to stop child protection at the door just by asking them if they have title to the child. Mm-hmm. And they can't say yes. They cannot say yes because to say yes would be to admit they're registering the people as slaves, and we've been told by vital statute that's emphatically not the case. So we've had a couple women do that recently this week, and they didn't know much, but we had a couple buddies who do, and they kind of helped them through it. But evidently they were butting them right at the door, and they all had to turn away, and we even called the sheriff up, or they had one of them call the sheriff and ask for his peace bond, and the sheriff said, yeah, he's a registered officer, and he asked the other people, and they didn't produce it, so he called the sheriff and said, hey, man, you're a registered peace officer. He goes, yeah. He goes, all right, if these guys don't produce it, I want you to come out here and arrest them. And that's basically everybody left. Because they're only corporate officials. They don't have a peace bond. They're not registered peace agents, so therefore they can't have authority from the Treasury, who makes all the determinations on who is or is not liable to pay, because it's all held under their little War Power Act, and they're going to control those estates and trusts.
Well, there's another factor you want to consider there. When you file criminal charges against somebody inside a corporation, it brings them outside the veil of limited liability. The corporation sets them on the ground in their own power.
Yeah, that's where we're going with it next, because since they can't produce any evidence that the name and all that stuff identifies someone, we can, and they start using it that way, you can bring it up under Title 18-641, which is unauthorized use of government information for purposes not of their intended use.
Yeah, well, I'm going to make a suggestion to you, and that is this. If you're interested in seeing how these criminal processes are being done and how to do them, why don't you contact Arnie here? He's on the show, and he'll have the material that you need to look at. You can see how it's done. I've worked this field for 36 years, and it's very simple. Yeah. And Arnie and lots of other people have copies of this stuff. Now, if you go to the Internet, look up Hartford Van Dyke, put it in quotes, quote Hartford Van Dyke on Yahoo or Google, and you'll bring up a whole bunch of stuff about me. Some of it's people that like me, some of it's people that don't like me. Well, you know a tree by the fruit which it bears, so don't worry about that. So just study it. You can find a lot of good information there. I'm surprised when I do get a chance to look at it. I'm not on Internet or email, so I don't have those connections, but there is a lot of stuff on the Internet. And if you look up paranoia.com, that's another website, paranoia.com. It was a magazine. It is a magazine. And I was in that magazine several times.
Hartford, I think they pulled that now because that link's no longer active.
Paranoia.com?
Yeah, at least I tried it last night or yesterday, and there was no way to link to the website.
Well, I can find out about that for you.
Okay.
I have another.
But Paranoia
I have another caller here. Area code 435. Could you tell us who you are and where you're calling from?
Sure, Keith. This is Wayne again, and I just have a comment and then a question. The comment is, when two people talk at once, I can't understand anything. All it is noise. So,
yeah, I'll watch that. I'll be careful about that.
You weren't. You were the one that was talking, but I don't want to dwell on that. I just want to get the message out that when two people talk at once, all we get is noise. And the question I have is, your information is very relevant to what I'm in the middle of trying to do, and I would like a way of being able to get a hold of you so I don't tie up the line for forever.
Well, just contact Mr. Rosner here, Arnie Rosner. I'm providing people with, and he'll line you up with all the information you need, contact information. And Arnie, why don't you give him your number, your information?
Well, I can tell you, just go to the scannedretina.com. It's on WordPress, and you'll find Hartford's contact information at the bottom of some of the documents that are already posted there.
Scanned.
Would you repeat that name for him again?
Yeah, the Scanned, SCANNEDRETINA.
Oh, Scanned Retina.
Scanned Retina, thinking ahead. .com. It's at WordPress. And then you do a search on Hartford.
Okay.
And you'll bring up his book. There's a book and the thing about bonds and the documents.
Now, there's a comment I want to make that I think is important for everybody out there in your listening audience, that you need to get this point clear. Everybody has been working these Internet systems with Internet names and so forth. They have not been putting their addresses on the Internet, and if this Internet is shut down by the government, they won't be able to get back to their original contacts. So it's important that everybody that's using the Internet put their actual house or personal addresses on, so if the Internet gets cut off, they can still use the U.S. Postal Service or UPS or whatever else. It's very important that you not rely upon your Internet address alone. If the government goes in here, they can throw the switch anytime they want to. They got control of it, believe it or not. And if they throw the switch on it, that'll disconnect all the patriots from each other.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to mention to the listening audience, any of you that are on the phone right now, if you would like to speak to Hartford, please press number 1 on your keypad on your telephone. That will alert me that you would like to speak, and then I will call upon you if you will press number 1 on your keypad. If you are listening on your computer, you can call in to area code 347-884-9499. And by making that call, it'll connect you to our switchboard. And if you press the keypad number 1, that will basically alert me that I have a caller that is waiting in queue. So go ahead, Hartford. You're back on to make your presentation.
Hartford, could we go back a little bit and talk about some of the terms you're using? Brokering, for instance. Some people might not understand exactly what that is.
Okay, well, here, I'll explain that. If you go into some banks, they have what's called private banks, like you go into a U.S. bank or a Bank of USA or something of that sort. They upstairs in the upper rooms of the building, you go up and down the halls, you'll see doors that say such and such private bank and such private bank. If you look it up in Black's Law Dictionary, anybody can have a private bank. It does not have to be chartered. No chartering is required for private banks. And the main banks like that have wanted to have be able to do what they want to do and don't want to have to worry about chartering are the big banks. And because they have this freedom for themselves, it's also passed down to the common citizen. The Public Wealth Rebate Bank Trust is a private bank trust. However, it only services the public as a public service. And that's in the book, How to Create Currencies for Local Communities, so you can read it. How to Create Currencies for Local Communities is a history thing on the front and a statement of how to do a public wealth rebate bank in the back half of the thing. And so it's an actual guide. It's a bank manual, and you get that. And a lot of these questions that people are asking are answered in that book. So try to get that. It's on the internet. I think the Seventh Fire has part of it. That's another internet site, the Seventh Fire. I think it's 7TH on the 7th, what they say. There are other people that have How to Create Currencies for Local Communities. Type in the name of the book on Yahoo or Google as the name itself, and you'll probably come up with it. How to Create Currencies, and then the Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars is also, in fact, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars is international now. Since about 2007, it started moving, and it's gone completely around the world. It's being translated into foreign languages. It's become recognized as some people should take a look at. So those are two of the texts. The other one of the others is The Skeleton in Uncle Sam's Closet, which is the first book I wrote, which is about the Pearl Harbor attack, because my father's uncle was the one that sent the warning message to the mainland, warning about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor 66 hours before the attack happened. And so that's the story of how Roosevelt betrayed the American people at Hawaii. So that book, and then the criminal complaint form, and then how to create, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, and then How to Create Currencies for Local Communities. That collection of books gives you a pretty good overview of how the system works. And so it's not a matter of just taking up. What I'll do is I'll go into more of the details on the show here of how you do these things and the fundamentals behind it, so that it'll give you some idea how you can get your own education. You need to know how to go through the books and learn these things. Is that okay, Arnie?
Oh, yeah. Anybody has any questions or something comes up later, please feel free to contact me at any time. I'm usually available around the clock. So.
And Keith will know where we'll have Arnie's information too. So let me say basically this. What you have to do, what I've spent my life doing, is simplifying the legal system and the legal process by focusing on the things that really count and setting the other things to the side. I don't use any case law in any of my work. Now, the fundamental reason of not using case law in work is because the judges are not legislators, and their word in the court is not supposed to become law. And so case law is, when you use case law in a courtroom, you're giving the judge permission to say he is the law and the court is the law, and he doesn't have to obey the Constitution anymore. So it's very dangerous when you step into the use of case law. What you're doing is you're giving a green light to both sides that allows them to play in their limited ball field where the judge is the god of the court. So you have to be very careful of that. Now, if you stay with the commercial law, which is ancient, commercial law runs back thousands of years. It started out as the Jewish law merchant, or merchant law they called it. The law merchant, they reversed the words, but it's called the merchant law. When it came to the ocean and people started going across the ocean by direct routes, it became admiralty law. When they went up the rivers, it was called maritime law, and when it went into the colonies, it was called colonial law. Now, up to the time of 1190, there's an article on this you need to read. If you can write this down, I'll give it to you. Look up Georgetown University is a Jewish university, as I understand it, but Georgetown Law Journal is what I'm sending you to. Georgetown Law Journal, Volume 71. Volume 71, pages 1179 to 2000. 1179 to 2000. Now, this covers the time period from 1190 AD to 1300 AD. In 1190 AD, England was under feudal law. That means the kings were rewarding the knights. Up to that time, the kings were rewarding knights with land for fighting in his wars. And so the knights became the landlords of the land, and the people that worked the land were kind of like a slave or serf, they called them. And when England had a class structure. We don't have a class structure, but England did have. And under that structure, the knight, if property was transferred, it had to be transferred at the same level of class structure, like from a knight to a knight, a landlord to a landlord. Nothing was allowed to fall to the commoner or common citizen. And that process of transferring the land was called attornment. To attorn meant to turn the land over. Attornment was the turning of the land over. The person that operated that procedure was called an attorney. An attorney's purpose in the English system was to guarantee the class structure, to keep the rich rich and the poor poor. And that's still their role in the world, and that's still their role in the United States of America. A lawyer is a different person. A lawyer is a person that believes that everybody has an equal right under the law. He protects people's rights on that basis. Equal protection of the law. So a lawyer is different than an attorney. An attorney tries to maintain the class structure, and a lawyer tries to make everybody have an equal protection under the law, regardless of a class structure. If you try to get an advertisement in a telephone book as a lawyer, they put you under attorneys. They're not the same thing, though. So a lawyer is one who's versed in the law. Well, the public knows the fundamental law, which is the golden rule. Do unto others as you would that they do unto you. So if you are practicing that rule, the golden rule, you are practicing the law. Well, they say you have to have a license to practice law. So they're saying you have to have a license to love your neighbor as yourself, you see. And so every citizen out here that's trying to practice the law in the real sense of practicing it is an outlaw because they're not licensed to be a lawyer. See how the problem is? It's a catch-22 situation. So, in fact, if you want to go in, if somebody needs your help in a courtroom, they need an assistance of counsel, and the judge won't let you go in there. You buy an interest in their case, let's say $30, something in excess of $20, and under the 7th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and the corresponding laws in the state constitutions, if you buy an interest in a person's case, you can walk right into court, right alongside them, sit at the table with them, and help them conduct their business. That's the simplest way to do it without a license to practice law. I've done that on a civil on what were called civil actions, and I even bought a criminal case one time that way. Took the guy's case for $1. And so you can do things. If you stay in commerce, you can do things you can't touch otherwise. Well, all of this commercial law, if you want to know commercial law, where it comes from and what its existence is, you look it up in the Old Testament of the Bible. And how you find it is you buy a book called Strong's Concordance or one of those other concordances to the Bible. If you look up the word surety, for example, it'll tell you how the word surety is used in the Old Testament, and that's the actual definition for surety in the commercial law field. So the Hebrews established commercial law thousands of years ago. It's the strongest system in the world, and it's the one that's used universally internationally. So all you have to know is basic commercial law, and you can do anything. There are only two main processes in commercial law. One is called the lien, and the other is called the distress. The lien is a paper debt collector. The distress is a paper sheriff. A sheriff arrests people and impounds property. So a distress arrests people and impounds property. A lien is a debt collector. It collects debts. Okay, that's simple enough. So you see these processes and you wonder where they came from. Well, they come from Jewish sources of the Old Hebrew Testaments. Now, I'm taking you back to this law journal. The reason I mentioned it is in this law journal at those pages, volume 71, pages 1179 to 2000, there is an article by a woman by the name of Judith Shapiro. Judith Shapiro, Shapiro. I don't know if she was related to the famous attorney Shapiro, but that's her name. And she gives a very, very rich explanation of the Jewish commercial system. And the name of it is the Jewish Shetar, a law of the Jews becomes a law of the land. And what it is it's describing what was called in those days the gauge, which we call today the mortgage. And so what the Jews did, they were invited into England by the kings to raise money for their wars and their armies. And so to get the money, the Jews said, well, you're going to have to regain the control of the property and use it for collateral, then we can do business. And in order to do that, the king had to dissolve the feudal system. That was the end of the feudal system in England because in order to have money to fight the wars and support his armies, he had to have the land as collateral. That destroyed the feudal system. And it established the Jewish Shetar, which is the mortgage or gauge, as the fundamental instrument. Well, that's your lien type stuff. That's the debt collection instrument we call the lien. And that established that as the fundamental cornerstone of English law. So the English law at that point became a unity of some other laws. Also, the Magna Carta of 1215 was generated in that period of time. And so you had the combination of the Magna Carta and the Jewish commercial law. And those two were fused together in England during that period of time from 1190 to 1300. And as a result, that traveled up through time and became the basic founding instruments not only of England, but of our colonies. And so that's what we had when the Declaration of Independence was established, and when the Constitution was established. It was not just common law; it was a fusion of common law and Jewish commercial law, and that's what we still have today, and that's the basis of it. Now, when you bring a charge against a judge, it's under this commercial system, and what you need to understand about commercial law is it is not an institutional process; it is a street process. It's non-judicial. You do not have to go to court. You don't have to do anything connected with the courts in order to write and enforce commercial instruments. Those things are taken to court by people that want to evade your commercial process and bring it into court. It's very simple. You write a document that goes into court that says we have not yet exhausted our remedies in commerce, and the judge has to boot the case out of court, put you back out in the hall, and tell you if you still want to come in this court, come back in, but try to settle it in the court. Well, if you don't take it back into court, then it stays out in commerce, and if you do bring it back into the court, you've given the judge consent to take it. And he likes that because in order to handle a commercial case in his courtroom, he has to be bonded by a commercial bonding company or an insurance company. But to handle domestic cases, he doesn't have to have any of that bonding. He can do what he wants to do. And so that's why you have this dichotomy within the system. The judge does not want to lose his bond. He saves that or protects it. The sheriff has the bond on the coroner has the bond on the sheriff. And there's all kinds of these connections within the system. So basically, you put in a document that says we have not yet exhausted our remedies in commerce, and no matter what case it is, no matter what case it is, it gets bounced back to the street.
I do have another caller, Hartford, here in the.
Okay, let's go for it.
This area code is one that I'm aware of. This is 408, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of San Jose, California, I'll bet.
Yeah, Grass Valley.
Valley is 408?
Well, I lived in San Jose for a lot of years of work, and I kept the number when I moved.
Okay, well that explains it.
I'm a general contractor.
Would you tell us who you are and then make your comments or questions?
My name's Mike School. And I had a question about the judges. Are all judges bonded like that?
Any judge that has to deal in commercial law has to be bonded.
Either bonded
or they have public insurance policies. Public what do you call it? They have a public service insurance policy, and they have to have that to do commercial. Otherwise, they're personally liable for any mistakes they make under commercial law. And from my experiences, they're not particularly bright about commercial law. But
so
they prefer to what?
Would it make a difference in the court system? Do those judges have to be bonded?
Oh yeah. Do you remember the Billings Montana Freeman case?
No.
Huh?
No, I don't really have a background in politics.
Well, there was 10 charges brought against Montana Freeman, and each one had to be bonded for $4 million, and the United States government had to go outside the territorial boundaries of the United States to obtain bonding by foreign countries at $40 million to handle that criminal case in the courts. That's how important bonding is. The United States government had to have a $40 million bond to handle that case. You see, an indictment. There's. Oh, well, this gets into another subject. What other questions do you have?
I was just kind of curious about commercial law.
Commercial law?
I wrote down what you were talking about, so I was going to look stuff up online after I got off the radio.
Yeah. Well, commercial law, as I told you, that one article you can go to, you can find a lot of references in the Concordance of the Bible to commercial terms. And it's not. I'm not approaching this from a standpoint of religion. I'm approaching it from the secular standpoint of doing trade. You understand that? And there are 10 statutes you need to understand out of the United States Code. If you want to write these down very quickly, they're very simple.
Okay.
Title 18. You use Title 18 to value your processes. That's the way you have what's called fair market value. If you don't put the prices on the processes by fair market value, it's considered to be nebulous, and they try to steamroll it. But if you use the statutes to establish the prices of what you're doing, that at least you can use the statutes for. But you don't even need the statute laws to handle commerce. The United States Code is really only convenient as a method of setting prices on things. Okay, like if you smash a car, you get the 3 estimates for the insurance company, right?
Yeah.
Well, you have the same thing with regard to this. These judges break the law. Well, you get your estimates out of the United States Code what those things are worth. Now, they've tried to lump all this together under Title 18, Section 3571, but if you go back to the books of 1975, they actually break it down for each type of criminal offense, what that offense was valued at. And if you use those values, they're very conservative now. And if you use those values, they can't argue with them because any other values would be bigger. You see? So that's the way you set your prices from the commercial side. But you need to know where those statutes are to be found. And here's where they are. There's a few in Title 18. So Title 18, Section 3, Section 4, Section 7, Section 13, Section 241, 242, 1581, 1001, 1581.
Okay.
1581 says that if you perform a public service for the government, they have to pay you for it because it's mandated. Title 18, Section 4 mandates that you do public service, that you report a crime. If you report the crime, if you do that task, then you have the right to bill the government because it was a mandatory statute. You had to do it. So the government has to pay you for the service of doing it under Title 1581, Title 18, Section 1581. Now, under Title 42, you have similar things. Under Title 42, you have Title 42, Section 1983, 1985, 1986. You have Title 42, Section 1994, which says there's no peonage or involuntary servitude, and if that's violated, then you get punished under Title 18, Section 1581 that I just mentioned. So the government has to pay for the service they mandate, and they have to allow you to file criminal complaints because you're mandated under Title 18, Section 4 to file them. They can't ignore it. And Title 18, Section 4 says you must report the crime to a judge or someone in civil or military authority, which means if the judge doesn't want to listen to it, you can take it to a civil authority. And if the civil authority doesn't want to deal with it, you can take it to the military. And so you have options. And but those are the best statutes right there. I've used them for 36 years. They're my favorite statutes. The 7 and 13 I've added here recently. Oh, yes, in Title 18, 1622, 1621 and 1622 are on perjury and the subordination, or what you call subordination of perjury. Suborn means to invite it toward you, to compel somebody to suborn them means to activate them to work with you. Okay.
To draw them to you.
What's that?
To draw them to you.
Yeah. Procure. The word procure is the word used in criminal law.
Hartford?
Yes. Does that help you?
Yeah. And one other thing I missed was I was listening to you about how to create currencies for local communities. I didn't hear any of the books or resources.
Well, the book itself contains that information.
Is that the name of the book?
What? How to
Is that the
create
name of the
currencies
book?
for local communities. Yes, Mr. Rosner there knows about it. The book, and it's it can be found on the internet if you type in quotes how to create currency for local communities. It's mentioned under the internet site called the Seventh Fire, and there are several others. I don't know the list. I picked up one time about 6 pages of listings, about 60 listings on it. So you'll be able to find it. It's not that. I don't know if they have the complete publication. Rosner has. I think you, Arnie, you have the full thing on, don't you now?
Yeah, I have it in a PDF format.
So you can get it from him that way.
Okay.
And if you have any other questions, ask him, and he'll relay them to me.
How do I reach you guys after the radio show?
I'm Arnie, ARNIE, at Arnie Rosner, ROSNER.com. And I'm also, the website is a scanned retina.
Okay.
And you can, or just Google me, you'll find me. I'm available around the clock. I wanted to ask Hartford while you're asking, how does one go about contacting the military if all other efforts have been exhausted?
There are several branches, of course: the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. The Air Force seems to be the most, actually, it seems to be the most up to date in their thinking. But we used to contact Fort Lewis or Fort McCord up here in Washington. One man was filed criminal charges against a judge and lien against a judge and an attorney in Kitsap County. And they put him in jail and told him until he released the liens, they wouldn't release him from jail. And he had somebody outside contact the military, put the criminal complaint in the military. The military passed it to the president and got a return back to act on it. And there's a naval base there in Kitsap County. And the Navy base picked it up. They called up the court and they said on such and such a day by noon he's to be out of that, or out of your jail, or we're coming in. And the court didn't believe it. Well, on the day appointed and on the hour of noon, they rolled right into the parking lot with jeeps and got him right out of jail.
But who would be the contact person within the military organization?
Judge Advocate Generals, JAG officers. The JAG officer has, as I understand it, has the same GS rating, that's a pay rating, as an attorney general in a regular United States District Court. And if a JAG officer is shorthanded on people to handle the law cases for the military, they'll call in somebody from the U.S. Attorney's Office. And reciprocally, if the U.S. Attorney's Office is short-staffed, they can call the military and get a JAG officer to come over and work in their office.
Let me indicate to the listening audience if there's anyone else who would like to ask a question of Hartford Van Dyke. If you press number 1 on your keypad, it will alert me that you wish to speak. We would like to make sure that everyone that is on the line has an opportunity to participate to the extent that they wish. And anyone that is listening to this broadcast on their home computers, if you dial 347-884-9499, that will connect you to our switchboard, and it will enable you to be able to also ask a question of our guest. Okay? Thank you very much.
What's next?
How about Randy Dew?
Randy Dew. I met him about a year ago. He's a civil rights activist, and he's got a website of his own that you need to look at. He does not like to get spam put on his internet system, so you have to register in order to get through a barrier there. But he asks some simple questions to make sure that you're a real person, and then the line opens up to you. Arnie, what is it? Freedom. What is his site? I'm not in this.
All right, I'd have to dig it up, but the main thing was his latest.
Well, was working two cases. He started out with a case, Klingsangs. It was an IRS case, and he did the best he could with that. He was starting learning some things from me and applying it. But he's very much self-motivated. He's had flyers on the street for years. He understands publicity and the importance of publicity. Battles you can't win in court, you can take right to the street and win them right off. That's the best way to fight a case. I put 100,000 newspapers on the street, and I have techniques for that. But the thing is, you need to get the public involved, and you have to keep your processes simple. Well, he's kept all that in his mind, and he's been able to put out flyers over the years, and he was just a natural to be able to apply commercial law once he saw the key of it. Commercial law is really very simple. There's basically 10 instruments in commercial law. The first one is the affidavit that you make, a chronology. It's like an autobiography of what happens in a case. And then that is dispatched to 5 different possible points. The you can put it into a criminal complaint, you can put it into a civil complaint. Civil complaint is between citizens on the street. A criminal complaint is between a citizen and an officer in the courts. And you also have another place your affidavit can go into is called a notice of interest. If you've got a case that you want to stop instantly, if somebody's going to sell the house out from underneath you and you want to stop the sale process, you file what's called a notice of interest, and it's the simplest instrument you can file. It's a one-page instrument. It lasts for 3 weeks. It puts the brakes on anything that's going on, and it breaks instantly, stops the thing instantly, and then that buys you 3 weeks, which, by the way, is a Jewish numerical thing. 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years. It's all Jewish, and it's in our our commercial system. Anyway. This document is very easy to write, and what it does is it gives you 3 weeks to file one of the other documents, and there are 6 other possible documents. But they're usually lumped together into 2 processes called a lien and a distress. The lien has 3 stages. It has a legislative stage, an adjudicative stage, and an executive stage, just like our government has a legislative branch, an adjudicative branch, and an executive branch. The thing that characterizes the commercial process is you do the legislation, you do the adjudication, and you do the execution yourself. It's all one strip. That's how you make the lien. That's 3 instruments. The distress is done the same way. It follows the same format, except a lien itemizes dollars that are owed, and a distress orders the repair of a breach of contract. That's basically what a distress is for, is to compel performance. So you have 2 documents.
And I do have another. I have another caller. Do you want me to try?
Yes.
Now, this particular caller, it's indicating a phone number which I don't think is legitimate. Actually, it's an area code 111. Whoever else is out there that
sounds international. Is that international?
Well, I don't know, but who out there wants to speak?
It could be international because I've sent notices globally.
Yeah.
Hello.
111 is international, I think.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Could you tell me who you are and where you're calling from?
Yeah, Kevin, Southern California. Hey, I have an interesting question for you guys. Where would you find a judicial officer's, executive or legislative officer's duty in the Constitution and the state Constitution? Does anybody know?
Oh, where would you repeat that one more time? Where would you find what?
Okay, where would we find in the state Constitution the legislative, the executive, and the judicial department officers' duties?
Okay, here, I'll give it to you for the U.S. Constitution. It's real simple. You go through the Constitution, you'll find in each one it describes the duties. For example, under 323, the trial of all crimes shall be Article 3, Section 2, Clause 3, 323. Article 3, Section 2, Clause 3 says the trial of all crimes shall be by jury. No, it says that the right of to be processed by a jury is right to guarantee a jury trial is under 323. Amendment, if you go to the Amendment 6 of the United States Constitution, that's the one on criminal. It says you have a right to your assistance of counsel. Oh, well, that would be number 5. You also have a right under number 6 and 6th Amendment, the right to question your accusers, the right to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, and it goes on and on. These are all lists of things that have to be complied with, and every one that's violated is worth $10,000 if it's a conspiracy, or $1,000 if it's a lone act under Title 18, Section 241 or 242. That's how you locate them. They're all, for example, you'll have one in 211, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 1 is all the 62 was executive. All of the executive processes are performed by the presidency, by the executive department, and if a legislator tries to violate that, if he tries to execute, or a judge tries an executive process, that's a violation of the Constitution. It's a criminal violation. In other words, you have partitions built into the Constitution that describes the things that have to be provided by the Constitution, and they're put in those particular departments, like the legislative, adjudicative, and executive departments. Each one, under its respective article in the Constitution, has a description of what's supposed to happen. And if that doesn't happen, then that public official has violated that part of the Constitution and is criminally liable for it.
Can I interject something? I think we slightly got off out of key here. We were asking about the state constitution here.
Well, you follow the state constitutions parallel the federal constitution.
Yeah, well, the state constitution seems to me to give the public servants more duties than the federal one, and I'd like to point out, like California, for example. In my view, that question that I asked, where the duties of the legislative, executive, and judicial department officers' duties, is a two-part answer to that question.
Okay.
For example, in California, if we're looking at the judicial department, it would be Article 6.
Okay.
And then whatever it states from there, and it would be similar in Washington, Idaho, and that wherever the so-called Declaration of Rights or Bill of Rights, and then we would look not only to let's say Article 6 of the California Constitution, but we'd have to go straight back to the front, which is the Declaration of Rights, where they generally say that all men are by nature free and independent. And basically what they did is they should have called that Bill of Rights duties of public officers, more than just the Declaration of Rights, because I think the writers of that didn't make it absolutely clear, so if you weren't really using your noodle, you wouldn't really get that. So anyway, that's just my contribution tonight for y'all.
You're basically right. The principles are up front in the Declaration of. Look at the Declaration of Independence as an example of that. The Declaration of Independence consists of 3 sections. Number 1, a general declaration of the rights of man. The second section is a criminal complaint written against the King of England. And the third section is what our colonists were providing as what they believed a satisfactory remedy. You see? And so the things you're talking about are actually contained in the Declaration of Independence. It was a solemn recognition of mixed war, which meant that we were being under attack by the king, and here's the crimes he was committing against us that proved it. And
right, I agree with that, yeah.
You can go right down the list of the charges of the King of England, against the King of England, and you can see the relationship between that and the Constitution of today. Now, what happened is, the Constitution of the United States provides certain job provisions to satisfy the need to correct what happened to the King of England. So if you make a grid, with the Declaration of Independence coming in on the side, giving you rows, and the columns coming down from the top, coming from the various articles of the Constitution. At the intersection point, you will see the provisions that have been made in the United States Constitution to deal with the problem that we had with the King of England. And I can
exactly. That's why they separated the powers. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and that's a simple way to do it, and a chart like that is available if you want it. Arnie's got it.
Well, that's good. I was just trying to clarify for people that the provisions for even such things as sovereign immunity to the people is declared in, like, let's say, take California Constitution, Article 1, Section 1. All men are by nature free and independent, and and they have other rights, among which are obtaining, possessing, protecting property, and seeking safety and happiness. Okay, so if that's true, that's Article 1, Section 1. Let's go to Article 1, Section 2.
Those are the general.
The sovereignty. Well, see, it's not very general, but it basically what it's stating is that it's my duty to make sure that all men are by nature free and independent, because it doesn't have an exception in there, except your duties. All men are by nature free and independent, except what the legislature shall declare them to be. Well, we didn't put that in there just for nothing, and didn't put any exceptions in there. So basically, each one of these officers, when they do go and perjure their oath, they're violating and constituting treason against the people of the state and of the U.S., So there we go.
That's right. That's right. It is treason.
Hartford?
Yes?
How would you approach the Obama situation?
I don't.
The reason a grand jury together and impeach the guy, guys. That's how you do it. Charge him crimes, and then he'll be out of there in no time.
That's basically correct. Yeah.
I have a.
But one thing I wanted to say about the Obama situation is, don't be too strong about trying to answer your questions with Obama, because Obama's a puppet.
Yeah, well, we know that. We're just looking for a way to break the situation up.
You have to start at home. You have to learn commercial law for yourself. You have to learn how to apply it, and you have to learn, in other words, how to use it. And then you deal with the problems that are near to you in your own backyard, and let everybody do it on that basis as they can.
Okay.
You can only reach.
I have a question, Hartford, and that is this: under the Sixth Amendment, it says that the people have a right to confront or cross-examine the accuser, or I assume that also means essentially the person who has had their life, liberty, or property violated, the person that is the victim of the alleged crime. You're supposed to have the ability to be able to cross-examine that individual. But there are so many victimless crimes that people are being prosecuted for, where it's impossible for a person to be able to cross-examine the injured party when there is no injured party.
No, wait a minute. You got a problem there. You're going to have to understand. There are the victimless crime concept. You have to convert everything. You have to look. There's two sides: domestic and commercial. If you got a problem, that is being thrown at you from a domestic side, and you try to go into court on a civil case, the judge will say, well, I think this and I think that, and throw in the wastebasket as frivolous or whatever they want to do, because they're operating under parliamentary procedure. You see? So you have the domestic and the domestic and the commercial to consider. You have to learn to define the type of problem you have as to whether it is domestic or commercial. And in many cases, you'll find it turns out to be commercial, not domestic. So one of the key processes in handling legal things is to recognize as soon as possible the commercial elements. A man came to me with a problem. He'd married. His wife and him weren't getting along. They divorced. He allowed it, or she demanded it, whatever the case. As soon as the divorce was completed, she wanted more than half of his property, and she hired an attorney. He was being taken to the cleaners. He didn't have an attorney of his own. And he said to me, that was the problem he brought to me. He says, what am I going to do about it? This woman's just cleaning me out of everything I got. And he says, I can't seem to take a gain position over this judge and this attorney on the other side, her attorney. I says, well, you married her for better or for worse? Yes. Well, in better in health and in sickness? Yes. And in good times and bad? Yes. I said, well, that was the contract, and that was a covenant contract. That's not a regular contract. That's a covenant contract, which is a blood contract, basically, okay? So I said, you had a nice system going there up theoretically in the beginning? Yes. I said, well, then you came along to this point in your marriage where things aren't working, and so you got a divorce, right? Yes. So she comes along and she wants everything, right? Yes. I said, well, she broke the commercial contract that exists. It's called a conjugal relationship or consortium. And when she violates the contract of consortium or conjugal relationship, it's a crime, basically. She made an oath under a marital oath that was binding. That's what's called a covenant contract. And I says, well, it's very simple. She wanted a divorce. You were generous enough to let her have a divorce. But then her agreed wanted all of your property. I said, it was a very simple way to deal with that. She violated the covenant contract. All you have to do is declare that the divorce is nullified and you're back married. He did it. He went into court with that. He says, I'm hereby declaring that I'm reversing the divorce and I'm married to her again. And the attorney had to fold up his deck of cards, and the judge too, and then walk off from the thing because he couldn't go any further with it, because then they would be engaged in alienation of consortium and violation of a conjugal relationship, and he could turn around commercially and sue them for it.
Well, what would have happened if the woman had gotten married previously to someone else?
It doesn't matter.
Then
she didn't have the right to do it. She violated it.
So his marriage would be restored, and the new marriage would be nullified. Is that right?
That's right.
Holy moly.
There's other things that are like that. Let's say a man is not able to keep up with his child support, and so they throw him into jail, okay? So there he is sitting in jail, and he can't make the money and all the rest of that. All he's got to do is file one paper that goes out to the door that says there are no such thing as debtor's prisons in the United States. A man cannot rectify the situation unless he has the freedom to do so. Your jailing me is in violation of the concept that there shall be no debtor's prisons in this country. They have to put him right back out on the street. The whole thing's over with. He's out. It's a commercial thing because he has got to pay child support. It's commercial. Once it's commercial, it's child support, it's commercial. Look at your Internal Revenue Service forms. You have a Schedule C. Are you aware what Schedule C says? Schedule C is an Internal Revenue Service form for small businesses. Okay? Basically, the idea is this. When you make money, you have to cover your overhead, don't you? I mean, you got a building, you got things that you have to pay money to keep them going, right? So you make a certain amount of money comes in, there's expenses, they're deductible, right?
Okay.
Okay. So there you are with an ordinary Schedule C situation. Now you apply it to a family. A family is one of the most important industries there is. And people never think of their family as an industry, and because of that, they pay and pay and pay and pay. You see, you're bringing children into the world. You're training them. You're taking 20 years to bring them from the cradle up to their adulthood. That's expensive. Did you know that? It's really expensive. Okay, well, in the process, you've had to cart them back and forth to school. You've used your car and so forth. You have the right, if you're running a family situation, to file Schedule C as having a service industry because you're creating laborers. And because of that, everything you have, every expense you have, running the kids around, the gasoline, the food, buying them videos, whatever that is necessary to educate them, to bring them up, it's all deductible under Schedule C. And the Internal Revenue Service is not going to tell you that. They just want to take some kind of a blanket deduction. No. You go in under Schedule C, and everything you spend to be able to raise your children is deductible 100%. Think about that one for a minute. That's commerce. That's how you learn to deal with things in the sense of commerce. And most people will admit the fact that the expenses are so great that they wouldn't have any net income left over to be taxed. You see what I mean?
Yep.
So you learn to take the situation that's before you and see it clearly in a commercial light. You only have to ask one question: what's it costing me? And why is it costing me? And what service am I rendering for the public by way of what I'm doing? If you're a parent, you're raising children. You're putting people back into the system. People are dying out there. There's got to be somebody to replace them, and you're replacing them by bringing your children into the world. Okay, the military has another viewpoint. The military has a selective service now, don't they? Well, selective service implies that the society has a responsibility to you. Now, you got that one, Mr. Rosner. That one's called the military lien right. Look up that instrument. The military lien right shows you the balance between the public and the military, the ordinary citizen and the military. Everything that the military requires of the citizen has a right to require back to the military. And the same with any judicial occupation, executive, legislative, or judicial. In other words, it's a reciprocal relationship. If you have to have a property in order to keep yourself alive so you're available for the selective service, you're sacrificing your life for the selective service, and the selective service is not voluntary, it's mandatory. And since it's mandatory for the government to reimburse you for that. And the most important thing you need in order to be available to the military is your property and your rights, your property itself. And for that reason, your property has to be free and clear to you as a sovereign. You understand? In other words, your property, basically, you have an automatic right to a land patent on your property. Now, there's a man that's dealing with that subject in Washington. He's holding the government's feet to the fire on that one because he's got a land patent. And let's see if I could get you. His name is David Darby, and he's got a beautiful file of these things. I could look it up for you here. It's probably in this pile over here, right? In this pile right here. Find one for it. He'll have one. I'll give you an address for this man, and if you want to see how powerful it is to use the military argument to be able to hold on to your property, that he's got it. It's beautiful. And he's holding the government to the task. The Constitution of the state of Washington was put in 1879 and 1887. They finally they revised the Constitution without the consent of the people. It took away the land patent effects. He's gone back, researched all that. He's pulling back the fact that everybody has a land patent, and the basic reason we have a land patent right is because we have a mandatory military service. And so anybody that's a veteran, especially a person that's been a veteran of wars, he's in a position to say, you can't have my property, you can't take it for taxes, you can't do anything with it. It's mine. I earned it by my military service. Isn't that interesting?
That's fascinating. If you give me his email address, I'd like to have him on as a guest.
Yeah, well, David Darby is his name. Have we got one here for David? Here, we got one for David. I'll give you his address. Oh, gee, it's done with gold. Bring me my other set of glasses. It reflects in this room here. Post Office Box 772, I think it is. Mm-hmm. Amboy, Washington. How do you spell that? I think it's 98601. Here it is. Here's the postal stamp on this. It's 98601 is the zip code.
How do you say the name of the place again? What?
Amboy, A-M-B-O-Y. Just a second. I got to get my glasses here. Can you read that label? Is that 772? P.O. Box 772, Amboy, Washington. A-M-B-O-Y. That is he's got one of the most amazing filings. 98601 is the zip code. Yeah. David A. Darby. D-A-R-B-Y. And it's a tremendous package. You need to get it, and he shows how you can use the military argument to hold on to your personal property. If you've been a veteran, they can't take your property away from you. You have a land patent on it, and you become a sovereign by serving in the United States military.
Wow. I can't believe that this is so unknown.
Well, he's put 10 years of research into it. It is the most thorough thing you've ever read. He's forcing the state of Washington to go from their 1889 Constitution back to the 1879 Constitution or whatever, 1878 Constitution. He's charged them with criminal charges for trying to cheat people out of their property. He's got an ongoing case. It's very deep and it's very, very well documented, and all the legal work is just neat as a pin. And that's available from him on disc, I think, if you want it. It's quite a packet. It's his brief alone before the courts, and he's got a man by the name of, an attorney by the name of, what is his name? Anyway, he's got a very sharp attorney. I can give you his telephone number.
Let's not do that. Let's not do that over the line, though. Let's
keep on going. Whatever you're going to do, then.
Well, if you send an email to Arnie with the phone number, that would be probably the best suggestion.
Yes, indeed, we can do that too. I'll get all that information to Arnie.
Okay.
Any of the listeners that want to call in, it's 347-884-9499. And any of those of you that are currently on the line, if you want to speak to our guest, please press 1. We've got about 15 minutes left, and so we don't have much time, but we want to make sure that you all have a chance to speak out.
Keith, I have a question that was raised. It's from a person that sent me this over Skype. Statutes, codes are for statutory persons, which are elected, appointed, commissioned, federal and state employees. Says statutes do not apply to the people. Does that make sense to you, Hartford?
Well, I know the Supreme Court of the state of Washington ruled that the revised Code of Washington was not law, and that's and Mr. Darby can give you the cites on that. That's Perosa versus Tacoma, I think, is the cite for it. Perosa, P-A-R-O-S-A, P-A-R-O-S-A. I think that's it, versus Tacoma, Washington. And so they admitted, the Supreme Court of the state admitted that the revised Code of Washington code is not law.
Hartford, what I'd like to ask you to do now for the remaining time that we have about 13 minutes. I'd like to see if we could just go ahead and go back to your book about the skeletons in Uncle Sam's closet, and if you could give us some information about this whole situation. This is a very fascinating story.
My father is Lyle Hartford Van Dyke Sr. I'm Lyle Hartford Van Dyke Jr. I was called Hartford Van Dyke from the time I was young, so that the junior-senior thing never got mixed into it. His uncle was Gerald Mason Van Dyke. He was in the G2 intelligence, Army G2 intelligence in the Hawaiian Islands at the time of the Pearl Harbor attack. His name was Mason Van Dyke. He was fluent in Japanese and Japanese strategy, and he knew their movements. He was very astute and had good connections there in the intelligence department. He sent the warning message to the mainland. He recognized that there was going to be an attack. He understood the way in which the Japanese did things, and that they were inclined to do a surprise attack on a Sunday. And so he finally homed in. He saw the information coming in. They'd lost contact with the picket ships that were following the Japanese fleet. They had split the fleet. Part was going down to the Dutch East Indies, and part was going over the top past the Aleutian Islands, and they dropped back down on Hawaii from there. Anyway, the information that came to him was that the Japanese were approaching the Hawaiian Islands, and they would arrive by Sunday, December 7, 1941. He had put that information, his warning, to Washington, D.C. There was a 10-hour time difference, I think it was, or something like that, 7-hour, 10-hour. The message arrived at 7 o'clock, the time at Washington, D.C. It was received by Rear Admiral Paulus Prince Powell. He warned, he sent it out on Thursday afternoon, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, December 4th, 1941. It was received that evening, 7 o'clock Washington, D.C. time, by Rear Admiral Paulus Prince Powell. And Powell took the message to Secretary of Navy Knox. Secretary of Navy Knox notified Stimson of it, Secretary of War Stimson, and Stimson notified Roosevelt. And Roosevelt came to them. He was crippled, but in that particular time he came to the intelligence department. And Knox and Forrestal, James Vincent Forrestal, wanted to pull the ships out of the harbor and put a defense perimeter around the islands. And Roosevelt, in a very coarse language, told them they weren't going to do any such thing. He was the commander-in-chief. They weren't going to do any such thing, and they were insistent about it. So he had a Marine Guard put on the three of them, Knox, Forrestal, and Powell, and held them at gunpoint and kept them at the building, brought in food to them and stuff, until after the Pearl Harbor attack, so they could not warn the men. And on Saturday morning, Secretary of Rear Admiral Paul Prince Powell was grieving because he knew he had lots of friends over there in Pearl Harbor that were going to get killed if they didn't get a warning. So he insisted that Stimson was not under guard. Stimson was Roosevelt's sidekick. And so anyway, Powell begged Stimson, we got to send something. And so Stimson went to Roosevelt about it. Roosevelt said, send this message. Expect Japanese sabotage. Well, the problem with that, and Powell said, is that all you're going to send? He said, yes. There wasn't enough for obvious reasons. You see, when you're going to have an air attack, you want all your machine guns and artillery up above the ground where you can fire at the incoming craft. And you spread your airplanes out on the ground so they can't be easily picked off by one bomb. You see what I mean? And he knew. And what Roosevelt was saying is, under sabotage conditions, you bring in your guns, you put them underground, you hide them, and you bring all your aircraft together so they're easier to guard. So Roosevelt gave them exactly the opposite warning that they should have had and made them even more vulnerable. And that was the setup that was done. And my father's uncle told him on Friday, the night before the Friday before the attack, he said, this is the situation. My father had gone to Hawaiian Islands. He stowed away aboard ship, and his uncle paid his passage. And when he was there, he went over about 1935, I guess is the general picture I get. And he became a wherever salesman for the Wherever Aluminum Company, kitchenware salesman. And they gave him access to the houses of the people in Hawaii and even the Japanese homes. And my father was the one that discovered, because of his going inside the houses and taking notice of what he saw, he was the one that discovered the radio transmitting and receiving networking systems of the Japanese, found out where their basic communication terminal was, told his uncle, and they went in and raided the place. And when they raided the place, they found a man in the bathroom tearing up stacks of rice papers with the names of all the operators on the island. And they grabbed him just before he flushed him down the toilet. And they took him back to their station. Well, they didn't get it all translated before the attack, but at least that's the way I understand. But what they did, they finally put it all together. They had a room that had all these pieces that they put together. Wore surgeon's masks, double doors, and everything, so the chips wouldn't blow off the tables. Put them all together and found out who all the operators on the island were, and went out and arrested them. But in the meantime, the Pearl Harbor attack happened. But he warned my father. He says, buy food. So the next day, Saturday, my dad went in and bought food from the Honolulu Drayage Company and brought it home. And he was told to drain the water tank, prepare clean water in the tank, hot water heater, and if when they start shooting, to get the kids under the mother and me and underneath the bed. And so anyway, in come the planes Saturday morning, and you're going right over the rooftops. He was in plain view of. He went up, climbed up on the hill, climbed up on top of the house. He was on a hill. He climbed up on top of the house, Waimea Heights or something like that. He could overlook the Pearl Harbor area and saw the planes diving down and putting the ships in the water. So he was really close to it. And they strafed a water tower in the neighborhood, and he was involved. He had worked as an embalmer and mortician for his uncle in Oklahoma. And when he came over, he brought that knowledge in his head. And when they attacked Pearl Harbor, he volunteered to the Williams Mortuary to handle the dead. Lost some of his best friends in that. So it was right in the family. And my father had sworn to his uncle he wouldn't divulge on anything about it until the uncle died. Well, in 1967, I talked with my father, and it was the evening after the people had gone home from his office, and he opened up on this. I was 27 years old, and he opened up with this information, unburdened himself on me, and told me the whole story of what happened. I wish I had that recorded. That lasted about an hour. And my father just went into total grief over it because he relived the whole thing very vividly, as if it was just happening the day before. I never seen my father cry before, let alone go into total grief over it. And so, anyway, I wrote a book on it, and I published it. What happened was that my father told me about this, and I said, "Oh, you got to get this off your heart. I mean, this is going to be hard on your system to keep this type of story." He says, "Well, I gave promises to my uncle I wouldn't reveal it until he died." And I said, "Well, okay." So I let my father control me on that one. I waited, and about 2 years later, the My Lai massacre happened. Remember the Lieutenant Calley incident?
Mm-hmm.
Well, our government was lying so much it just made me sick. So I thought, well, it's time to get this thing out on the surface. And so I sent copies of the Pearl Harbor. I wrote up a thing about Pearl Harbor and sent copies to all 535 Congress people, senators and representatives. And then I called my father. I sent one copy to my father, and I called him on the phone. And I said, "What did you think of that?" He says, "Well, son, you didn't have it quite right." Well, it was 2 years since he told me, so some of it wasn't quite right. Well, I had a tape recorder on the line at that time, and I recorded his whole conversation. And he told the story. Once he got started, he retold the story on the telephone. It wasn't as long as it was in the original version, but he told it. And then later I printed it. I wrote the book about it.
Do you still have that recording?
Oh, yeah, and there's also a copy of it in the Naval Archives.
Is there a way that I can access it on the internet?
No.
I would absolutely love to be able to hear that. Have you ever thought about possibly preparing a DVD?
Well, I don't have the equipment for that. I just plain don't have the equipment for it. But that tape recording exists. I gave copies out. I wrapped them in magnetic metal, what they call mu metal copies. They were 3-inch. They were 3-inch across. I had conversations with Admiral Kimmel, with Kimmel's son, Admiral Powell's wife, and my conversation with my father. Got a few things on tape, and I made copies of them and provided them to several Congress people. Wrapped mu metal tape. That's the days when you had 3-inch reel to reel. You know what I mean? 1/4-inch wide tape. That was 1967 period. 1967 period. And anyway, I put mu metal around them so they couldn't be demagnetized from outside, and shipped them off to these people. And so the tape exists, but I have no means of reproducing it.
Yeah. Well, we only have about 2 minutes left, and so I'd like you to go ahead and maybe summarize, if you could, and maybe we can have you on again in the near future, because this has been a very fascinating show. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. What do you want me to do?
Well, you've got 2 minutes, and so whatever you want to say, you have about 2 minutes to say it.
Well, what I suggest to people is this. The first place, if you're getting into legal stuff, study commerce first. Don't go into case law, because there's a mountain of it, and it's all stuff that's created by judges. It is not the principles. Always argue your cases connected with principles. Keep it simple. Keep your documents very simple. Only say what absolutely has to be said. Your documents have to be written with 7 parts. You have to name the parties, the allegations. You have to ledger the problem. You have to put a surety involved in it. You have to put your exhibits in, and you sign them, and you have a notary. Those 7 steps will get you any commercial instrument in the world. You can write any commercial instrument. Your most important commercial instruments are the lien and the distress. All a lien is a bill that's sworn to be true and notarized, and then what you can convert any bill for collecting a debt into a lien by swearing the truth of it as an affidavit, having it notarized, and attach the property, make a listing of the property of the person that owes you the debt, and then file it in the courts, and that ties their property up until they pay your debt. That's what a lien is for. It's a debt collection instrument. And the difference between a lien and a distress, which is the other commercial instrument, is that in a distress, instead of itemizing the money that's involved, you're itemizing the particular job, the process that the judge is supposed to guarantee for you, or whatever other type of thing is guaranteed under the contract to the person. You recognize their breach of contract and demand a correction of the breach of contract. Otherwise, they don't get their property back because you attach their property until they behave themselves. You look these things up under the words lien and distress, and if you want a really good dictionary, you get a Bouvier's Law Dictionary of the late 1800s, and it's got the lien process in 18 pages running about, and the distress process in about 5 pages continuously running. It'll give you everything you need to know about commercial law and how to activate it.
Okay, well, we're out of time.
That's my 2-minute summary.
well, we're out of time, and I want to thank Arnie for introducing me to Hartford Van Dyke. I appreciate this show very much. I think that it was an outstanding effort, and I'd like to thank all of those of you that listened to the show this evening. Share this information and share the website with your friends, and encourage people to go to the archive show at www.blogtalkradio.com/Friends of Liberty, and they can access the archived show 24/7. So good evening, everyone, and God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you very much.